Hello and welcome to the Camo Comedy Podcast, the only podcast where roses on your piano are better than tulips on your organ. Today I am hosted in by my buddy Ian,
Hello, hello.
and today we have a very influential person today, a very important person in my life, and a great person to spend the 4th of July with, my own father, Dr. Davis Mcalister.
Hello.
Normally, as you guys all know, I'm the one that's starting this off, but with Mac's father being present, we are going to let him take the reins and just kind of roll with uh, roll with the
The
punches,
interview.
if you will.
All right, so Dad, for all the people that are listening at the house, please give us an introduction about you.
Just kind of I guess, a brief overview. Dr. Davis McAllister. I've had quite the journey over my life. I grew up in Mississippi, um, and was what they call a latchkey kid. Our parents, at that there was a lot of us at that time. We're kind of known as the last feral generation, I guess, because um, our parents would leave at 6 o'clock in the morning. They wouldn't come back till 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and bedtime was 8:30. Um, so that's kind of the way we grew up. So if it was going to happen, it was because we did it. I don't know how more houses didn't get burned down during that time frame, um, especially with some of the other people that I know. But uh, with that goes along the lines of, there's not a lot of parental involvement. I mean, I got a lot of the basic things of saying yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, being polite, let a lady walk through the door. I got a lot of the basic stuff growing up, but other than that, it was up to us to just kind of figure it out. Um, Long story short, ended up senior year of high school. Ended up uh, kind of in conflict with my own parents, just because uh, my father-in-law and I butted heads my father and I butted heads quite a bit. So I ended up getting kicked out of my house the second half of my senior year of high school. um, and I was literally living on the streets. I was sleeping on the pallet behind the grocery store, uh, and then having to dig food out of the trash cans, things like that. And I was also working towards trying to go to the Air Force Academy. And given the climate at that time, and I know with the younger viewers, they're going to have a hard time fathoming this, but we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have internet, we didn't have any of that. Matter of fact, my senior year of high school, they just got computers in the school, and they were the big box computers that had all the green writing on it. And I think they put electricity in the next year. So, um,
This was back in
yeah,
the late 80s, early 90s, correct?
yes, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So, and that was a joke about the electricity coming the next year. Um, but yeah, we didn't have any of that kind of communication. The only communication we had was either a telephone on the wall, and there was no long distance. If you called long distance, it was because you called collect, and the other person on the other end had to accept the charge. Um, and of course, Air Force Academy is not going to do that. The only other communication was just putting a stamp on a letter and putting it in the mail. Well, I didn't have any of that, so that opportunity basically went out the window. My original idea, I wanted to be a pilot. Worst case scenario, at least a flight officer, navigator, in jets. But like I said, given my situation at the time, that ended up not becoming an option. The only recruiter we had to come to the high school was an Army recruiter, and he comes in and tells me, hey, we'll give you a place to stay, we'll give you food, we'll pay you clothes. All you gotta do is just do what we tell you to do. And I said, fine. So I said, sign me up. And he managed to have me on a deal. I was 10 days after high school graduation, I was off to basic training. So, and so that was my escape out of my situation. Um, Long story short, spent 8 years total in the military. Did a little time with the National Guard, but mostly it was active duty. Um, then got out, went to school, got my first, went to school at Mississippi State, got my first bachelor's degree, finished my first bachelor's degree in 2.5 years. Then moved to Texas, got my doctorate degree, and that's also where I met my wife, Davis's mom, and uh, we started growing our family from there, and then it's just been a long journey. I've gone from being in full time private practice to, we had a bad economic downturn back in the 2006, 7, 8 time frame. Um, and the majority of my practice at that time was insurance. And so when 3/4 of your practice ends up dropping off because nobody has insurance anymore and can't afford care, that causes some serious damage to your financial stability. Um, so that's how I ended up looking for other options to bring in income, and that's how I ended up teaching and coaching, is because they had some opportunities there. They also found out that, could backtrack a little bit, when I was at Mississippi State. The last couple of years I was in the service, I had started becoming a competitive power lifter, and was still doing that when I first got to Mississippi State. And my organic chemistry lab partner was the starting tight end on the football team. And I had grown up watching Mississippi State football. I you know, loved the Bulldog Nation, and so I had never really had any aspirations that I was going to go play football, especially considering I was a kid. My parents would never sign off for me to go play football. Even at one time, we had a private school there in the town that we lived in, and the head coach saw me out throwing a football in the front yard one day, and actually stopped, offered me a full ride scholarship to go to this private school if I would come play football for him, and my dad would never sign off on it. So, and I would have gotten a much better education. So rather than the you know the public school education that I got, but um, yeah, so that was another opportunity. So I mean, I was a pretty good athlete. I'm not going to say I was the best athlete, but I was a pretty good athlete growing up. Um, but I mainly played baseball, and I ran track, and I did stuff like that. But even growing up, if I played a sport, it was because I got myself there. Sometimes I would have to ride my bike anywhere from 2 to 5 miles to go to a practice. And it was up to me to get there, and then I still had to get home, have all my homework done, and all my chores done before my parents got home. So, um, but so fast forward, go to Mississippi State, and I go and work out with the starting tight end, and he's like, "Dude, you are freaking strong." He said, You are to come out and do a trial." He said, "How fast are you?" I said, "I have no idea." I just knew, you know, I had done some sprinting in high school. I had a pretty good sprint time when I was in high school. I ran the 100 and the 200, and I was in sub 11s on the 100. Um, uh, so we went out. He said, "There's a walk on tryout." He said, "Let's see how fast you are." I was like, "Okay." And at the time, granted, at this point, I've already spent 8 years in the military. And so the only time I really knew that I could run was my 2 mile, because that's what our PT test was a 2 mile run. And I was running about a 13 and a half, 2 mile. Um, so we go out,
That's
and it
all
turns out I
an
was,
Yeah.
I,
When you're
I
used to it, it's
wasn't
not so
even,
bad.
I was in the unit that I was in, I was average, you know, so I was kind of yeah, we had a guy in the unit, he was running, he was also a marathon runner. I hated him. I loved him, but I hated him. Uh, he would get out. We'd do our 2 mile PT test, and he was running at like 9:26. I remember that time specifically. He ran at 9:26, and then he just kept running. You know, after he got done with his 2 miles, and so he said that was a warm up, and just kept going. So I told him he was an asshole, but
It's nice to
um,
know that you had Forrest Gump on your fucking team.
yeah, no
Yep.
shit. Yep. So um, he so I'd go to Mississippi State, and we do the 40 test, and I run in a 4.640, and at this point I'm 25, 26 years old. Um, and so I go through a walk on tryout. I was one of a couple guys that they kept, and mine was just pure, therapy. Going from the military onto a college campus, and there was some adjustments that seriously had to be made going from those two different environments, and so I was using football as therapy. I had no aspirations whatsoever of trying to go play anything higher than that. I didn't even anticipate even getting on the field. I just, it was just a good outlet for me to be able to hit people without getting in trouble. So,
Fair enough.
um, yeah. So I did that, but um, because I had that experience when I started looking at teaching jobs just to try to fill the gaps in our finances. I found out I played some college football, so they're like, "Hey, do you want a coaching job too?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'll go coach." So I had to go interview with the head coach, um, and since we're on this part, there was one thing that he profoundly said to me, and at the time it didn't make any sense, but as I've gotten older and gotten more experience, he was absolutely right. Um, and he becomes more and more right. When I was doing that interview, he was like, the question is, can you teach it? And I'm like, well, I mean, I played. I mean, if I played, I should be able to teach it, right? He said, just because you played it does not mean that you know how to teach it. He said, teaching and educating or coaching, anything along those lines, is being able to take what you know subconsciously in your own head and being able to effectively communicate it to somebody else so that they understand it the same way you do. That's the difference between a good educator and a poor educator. And he
That's
was
deep as
absolutely
hell.
right.
That's actually
Yeah.
really deep.
Yeah. But he's absolutely right. I mean, if you think about your own school experiences and or even people that you served with, you've got people that are really good at their jobs, but they are absolutely awful about trying to teach anybody else how to do it. And that's what he's talking about. You know,
Yeah,
um,
there are a ton of public educators that they don't know how to teach shit. They know about shit, but they don't really know how to teach anything.
Yeah, which is
yeah,
rather unfortunate.
yeah.
Mhm.
There's people that do jobs because it's a paycheck. Unfortunately, there are people that do jobs that they think they're really good at their job and they're not. Um, it just depends on really, personal perspective, but it's also about the level of impact that you make. If you're actually impacting other people, you're doing what you're supposed to do, and you're good at your job. But if you can't impact other people, you know, and walk away with somebody making a difference, you haven't done your job. And unfortunately, I mean, there's people that I in the same institution working with right now that they think that they are absolutely awesome at their job and they're making a tremendous impact. Yet when I get those students coming up, I teach at a university now as part of what I do, and got into it with this one instructor that she was like, I'm making a tremendous impact on all these students that are coming up, and she didn't agree with the way I was teaching something that was kind of piggybacked off of what she was teaching. But when I got these students, it was a year after she had contact with them, and she's talking about all this impact that she's making when less than 5% of the students actually remember anything that she taught. you know
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't, win any friends when I said that in a meeting, because, she was coming at me a little bit and I just sat there quiet. And then finally I was just like, I said, I understand what you're saying. I said, and I understand what your heart is. I said, but it really didn't make a difference if by the time they get to me, that none of them remember anything that you taught them. And that kind of, you know, I think I made an enemy on that one. So that's okay.
Oh boy.
Fair.
Yes. So when I see this individual, I just saw this individual last week, and the best I get is a side eye. So, but
Mhm.
you know,
I feel like
but
it's like I was
yeah,
gonna
go
say,
ahead.
I feel like when you have people that their views differ from yourself, especially in like a
Mhm,
teaching environment, there's always going to be some butting of heads,
mhm.
but eventually you got to find a middle ground, unfortunately, even if you don't get along. And
Yeah.
for the sake of the students, in your guys' case, it would be best to keep your arguments and your disagreements private and not have it in front of the students itself.
Yeah, we don't do that. We don't do that in front of the students. But and what I teach is, where my education is. I'm teaching people that are going through a doctorate program, and I'm getting in their first year of clinicals. So they're graduating from the academic side, and they're coming over to the clinical side, and so that's where I'm getting them. So everything that I teach, we have certain standards that we have to meet because of regulation boards and crediting boards and all that stuff. But the stuff that I teach, I try to teach from a practical application standpoint. But I'm also teaching it from somebody that's been doing it out in the field for the last 23 years. And unfortunately, what you get a lot on the academic side is a lot of theoretical stuff that with no field application. um, we want to get into philosophies and nuances and all these things when it's evident that somebody has not had much experience out in private practice and having to do this stuff in real time. Because bottom line is that when you have contact with the patient, you really don't have a lot of time. You don't have time for nuance. You've got to be able to identify what the problem is, come up with a plan to be able to deal with that problem, and then take care of the patient. um, So unfortunately, that's where the difference is. But what I do tell my interns, I said, you need to discern what is best for you. Whether it's my approach, whether it's her approach, all those things. You got to figure out what's going to work best for you, because at the end of the day, once you step outside of the school, it's all on you at that point. So
I feel like that's also really good advice, regardless of the field you work in, whether it's medical, military, or anything else civilian.
yeah, yeah. The bottom line is, if you put, especially if you work in the healthcare field, your standard is what's best for the patient. And sometimes the where you run into a problem is that you have what somebody's opinion is of what's best for the patient, rather than following a standard of what's best for the patient. um, and that does overlap into other things as well. It comes back to your intent and your purpose. And so if you are uh, whether you're a mechanical engineer, or it's about who you're serving. And just because you have a doctor in front of your name does not make you, it does not make you God. It does not make you all knowing and all seeing, and definitely doesn't mean that you know more than everybody else. Matter of fact, I just read an article this morning. It was talking about it was an infant. I think it said it was about 5 6 months old, infant, and supposedly had drowned. They got it to the hospital. The baby was still alive, and the doctor just declared the baby dead, and it sat in a morgue for several hours. And the baby still lived, but now it has permanent brain damage. And when the doctor was confronted about it, he said, "I'm the one with the degree." You know, yeah. And so, and
That
there
guy's a
are
piece of
research.
shit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that guy should
and
lose his license, unfortunately.
yeah, yeah, and the article that I said, they said no, there was no recourse, and there is recourse. The family of that infant needs to gather their evidence, get attorney involved, and then people like that don't need to be making decisions for other people, especially when their lives are on the line.
Yeah, absolutely not. But so Dad, we have a few questions that we wanted to ask, involving your story and everything.
Hmm.
So one of the questions that we want to ask, or that I wanted to ask you, was how are the differences of how you were raised versus how you raised us?
Yeah. Um, my perspective on that is that I wanted to do something very different than what I grew up with. Unfortunately, and especially on my dad's side of the family, every family has some semblance of a generational curse. It's something that continuously happens from one generation to the next, whether people do it intentionally or not. And unfortunately, the generational curse on that side is, typically whoever the male head in the family is has very little to do with the rest of the family, and then by the time they get to the adults, they completely discard their family. And and I was, and it was interesting because I even remember my dad telling me that he wanted to do things differently, but ultimately he didn't. Um, he ended up making the same decisions. Now, based on the stuff that he was telling me, my dad was not an alcoholic. His dad was. His dad had severe PTSD from being in World War II. Um, and so there were some dynamics there that I didn't have to experience. So from that standpoint, it was better, but there was little to no relationship. Um, and so, because I mean, I have a few fond memories of being able to throw football and baseball in the yard and doing some of those things. But when it came to other stuff, I mean, because he was working all the time, he was never present for anything that I did. Um, if I got to, if even baseball games growing up, if I got to a baseball game, it's because I got myself there. And unfortunately, I was a kid. I was constantly looking up in the stands, and there was nobody there. And so that was definitely something that I wanted to do differently, and because it did mean something to me growing up, is that I wanted to be present for all of my kids, and even when I started into practice, it was kind of a divine intervention the way things happened, and I ended up in public education because and I could have at any point left public education and gone back to doing private practice. But the problem is with private practices is that it is a lot of hours of work. And when you're not treating patients, you're having to market your office, you're having to do all those things to keep the business side of stuff going. And it requires a lot of time and energy, but it also takes time away. Um, and it was interesting because at the time, um, Davis and his sister were about 3 or 4. Youngest sister was, maybe a year or 2 old at that point. And then we had our 2 older boys, and, I ended up in a situation where I was at home with them, taking care of them, because we had to shut the main office down, and I went into part-time practice for a little while, just seeing the patients that I still had, but we couldn't afford the main office anymore, and so we had to make some changes there. But had to move the office to our house and set up an office in my house and was treating people out of there. But um, you know the the thing was is I ended up at the house with all of my kids, you know, full time. My wife was able to go. She was able to get a job working for another doctor because she was my office manager as well. She got a job working for another doctor, um, and that was not having the same issues. They lived over. He worked over in a different area, and it was a very affluent area, so they weren't having the financial difficulties that we were. So, but she was able to get a job right away, and I didn't really have anything to transition to very quickly. So I ended up at home with the kids full time. And the biggest slap of reality is that when I ended up at home with all my kids, I didn't know who any of them were. I knew their names, I knew their birth dates, but I didn't know anything about them. I didn't know what they liked. I didn't know what they didn't like. I didn't, I had no idea what their favorite things were. Uh, and so I looked at that as a blessing in disguise because it did wake me up and bring me around to the realization that if I didn't do something different, I was going to end up repeating the same thing that I had growing up. And um, so when I got the opportunity to go into public education, I stayed in it until every one of my kids have grown. And so, the last few years, when Davis and Dana were going through school, I wasn't teaching at the high school, but I stayed involved because I had built up a pretty good reputation as a powerlifting coach. Was good at developing really, good
One of the
teams and
best
big.
in the entire state of Texas.
and
Dad,
but
I'm
that
pretty sure not every single powerlifting coach has had the Texas flag flown in their honor at the Capitol.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, that's what I don't know if you can see it. There's a certificate right there. That was the certificate that came with the flag that was hung up over.
That is cool.
Yeah, and it says this is certified that the Texas flag is presented to Coach Davis Mcalister um, by it was one of my former athletes in the Texas House of Representatives. Um, was flown on the Capitol of the sovereign state of Texas on August 26, 2021, in honor of teacher appreciation. So yeah,
That
and that
is awesome.
yeah that athlete submitted that for me because he said I made such an impact on his life. Um, but that was a mode that allowed me to be able to stay involved with my kids. All the way through. Now, there's probably some not so fun memories because when you are the coach and you're a coach's kid, the expectations of the coach's kid goes way up. Um, and
Yeah.
they have to live. They have to live by a standard that's way above everybody else, which is good and bad.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm
Because
willing to bet that Mac has had a couple of instances when he was growing up and when you were actually in the position of being his coach, where he felt the pressure was on so high that he made quite a few dumb decisions.
yeah, and all of them have, and they,
Especially in
um,
football.
yeah. Well, we won't talk about football.
We won't talk about that one.
um, but it allowed me to be able to stay, and I stayed in it for that very reason. It definitely wasn't because of the great pay. And it's the thing. I don't even know if all of our kids just if they even look back and realize. I mean, there was a lot of times that I was working, and I would take on extra duties and all these things just to make ends meet, just so that I could continue to do that, um, so that I could still be a part of everything that they were doing and what was going on. I would have to take a lot of extra stuff on, and sometimes a lot of stuff after hours and doing work just so that we can make ends meet. And um, I worked every summer. All the rest of the teachers and most of the coaches were off during the summers. I worked every summer because I was a strength and conditioning coach, but you know, I was intentionally taking all those things on, and I would teach summer school just so that we had money to be able to buy school clothes at the end of the summer. That's what paid for their school clothes at at the end of every summer before school started. Um, and so I was having to do a lot of those types of things so that I could be able to maintain, um, that experience with my kids. So so that's definitely something that I did different, and whether any of them can look back on that and appreciate it, I don't know. It was more of, I feel like it made a difference for me at least, because I have a lot of fond memories with my kids that, I guarantee you, there's not a whole lot of dads out there that have, you um, and
Yeah.
so, and watching, I mean, and it's great from a coaching and teaching standpoint to be able to see the influence and impact that you have on other kids. But it definitely, you know, with your own kids, and I think when you're a coach's kid, it's even harder to appreciate it because you have to go home and live with it too. And so there's
Yeah.
there's not that separation. There's not that separation of coach had to chew your butt that day. That you get to go home and just vent to mom and dad that you got in trouble. Now you get to come home and deal with it at home a little bit too.
Yeah.
But most of the time they would come home and vent to mom, and you know, and then we'd get up and start over the next day. So
Yeah.
I will say, like, when it comes to
So
growing up with my dad and everything, like, I know he was working a lot of hours and everything because, especially like my middle school to high school years, we didn't really have a
mhm.
whole lot of money, and my parents were going through some tough times at around that time frame. but my dad, he just
Yeah.
kept working through it, trying to make sure that my brother and I were taken care of. Which
Mhm.
honestly, a lot of respect to him for that. But looking back from when I was even younger than that, any chance he got, he would hang out with us, spend time with us. And
Mhm.
even to this day, I am convinced that the only video game I could get him to play is Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter. And I'm not really a Street Fighter player.
I like me some Mortal Kombat now.
But I mean,
So, Dad,
yeah,
um, growing up, and and you've gone through a lot whenever you were growing up. Being homeless. Not was it not having a great relationship with your father. What would you consider was the hardest adversary for you during that time?
Um, going the biggest thing that at that point was my self confidence. My self confidence was shot. Um, I grew up, and unfortunately, during that process too, I was growing up being told that I was stupid all the time. I had, they didn't diagnose ADHD back then. You were just a bad kid, and so so I got in trouble quite a bit. But the biggest thing was the blow to my self confidence. Matter of fact, when I was in first grade, my ADHD was so bad um, that they ended up putting me. The school put me in testing because they thought I had mental retardation. Um, yeah, and so I went through. I had to go through take this big IQ test and everything else. That they were trying to prove that I was retarded, and and it turns out I was exactly the opposite. I actually had a really high IQ, but I just had so much energy that you know that I had a hard time burning it off, and it affected my ability to be able to focus. When I could actually sit down and focus, you know, I did really, really well. But there was no medication for stuff like that. There was no you were forced to have to deal with it on your own. You had to be able to recognize. You had to learn how to recognize what the issues were, and then figure out, okay, this is what the problem is, and sit down to be able to make yourself learn how to focus. And you would have to do it maybe at short intervals. Um, but I remember one of the things that was most difficult. We would be given these books to read, and I'd have to sit down and read a book, and I'd get about maybe a paragraph or two in, and then my mind would just start wandering, and I started thinking about something else, and then my eyes are still gleaning over the page, but I'm not processing anything that's being written.
yeah,
It's this whole big fantasy going on inside my own head, and I would have to go back and read that over again. But I got to the point where I could actually start. I had to train myself to be able to focus for longer periods of time to be able to get through that. Once I figured all that out, um, you know, it, there were no crutches to deal with. There was no crutches to fix the problem. It's either you figure it out or you didn't. Um, and there was, like I said, there was no medication to fix things. Um, and so, uh, but because I had to go through that, it ended up benefiting me and you know, taking me much further later on. But but even still now, even my wife will tell you, there's times that when I sit down to do some work or do things, it takes me a few minutes to kind of get my brain geared up to where I can start working on something, and then once I'm able to focus and lock in, I'm locked in. Then the opposite effect happens is that I get started on something, and then I don't want to stop until I finish. It's hard for me to stop.
yeah.
There's times that I've started working on something and that I've stayed up all night. I finished it, but I didn't sleep.
I've been there.
I I remember those nights too.
Yeah. I would just stay up all night until I finished whatever it is that I was working on. Um, and that causes some issues sometimes because you know Teresa's like, you need to go to bed, you need to stop what you're doing, and it's hard for me to do that, because even if I stop and I go lay in the bed, guess what I'm doing? I'm still thinking about that, and now it's bugging me because it's not finished.
Yep.
you know
Mm.
so then that's where the OCD part comes in, that tags on to the ADHD. um and but kind of going back to your question, as far as learning, the most difficult thing was just my self confidence. I was shot. Um, when you growed up, people assumed you were retarded, and then they figured out you're actually not retarded. You're actually pretty smart, but now you're just a smart bad kid because you know because you have a hard time learning how to sit down and focus.
Yeah.
And so, um, but my dad didn't have any patience growing up at all. If you didn't learn it the first time he showed it to you, you were stupid um, and and called stupid and dumb and all these things. And so that was a lot to come overcome. That's why my time in the military was so important. And I know this was a question you were going to get to. I don't want to jump ahead of you, but
Hmm.
this is where my time in the military was most important because that's where I was able to turn a lot of that around.
Yeah. So our next question is, why was your what was it? So uh do you think that having a chip on your shoulder or having something to prove is the key to success?
So, I've written a couple books, and one of the books that I wrote is talk about success by design. Um, and I've identified four different levels of reasons for success. So, obviously, the most basic model, and kind of what you're alluding to, is really the most basic model, but it is not a sustainable model because when I first you know, got out from under, my parents, and I got in the military, and um, my thing was determined that I'm not dumb, and so everything I did was geared around trying to prove that I wasn't dumb. And so, I mean, you can kind of equate that to being having a chip on your shoulder, but that is success. You're trying to achieve success based on somebody else. And so, I call that, success for, success and rebellion is what I refer to it as. You're trying to prove to somebody else that you are not what they say you are. Um, the next level up from that is, um, trying to succeed for the sake of yourself. You're trying to succeed because you've got some sort of goal that you're trying to attain. You've got some sort of personal agenda or a plan in your own head that you're trying to achieve success for. And then the next level after that is just succeeding just for the sake of succeeding. You've set a standard for yourself, you set a standard for your life, and so you are trying to achieve success just because that's what you have based your life around. And then the last level, and this is where I want people, if anybody takes anything away from this part right here, this is what I want people to take away: is success for a purpose. I want to succeed because I have a purpose, and I'm trying to do something that's bigger than me. I want to find God's purpose and serve whatever it is God's purpose is for me. And whether it's by educating other people, taking care of other people, um, being able to get up in front of audiences and be able to share information that's going to make a big impact on them. That's succeeding with a purpose. Um, it was one of those things that, and when you start living that way, the exterior of that is that everybody looks at all the stuff that you've accomplished and all the stuff that you've done, and when you're living with that intent, you don't even you don't even pay attention to that. You don't even pay attention to all the little different, you know, the things that you've either accomplished or done. It just doesn't even become part of your thought process. Um, one of the consulting firm that I do independent contracting with, they asked me to put together a master portfolio, and so they wanted me to put together basically a portfolio of everything that I've done career wise. That way, when they meet with clients and they start presenting their contractors up to clients of these are the people that you can work with. Here's their portfolio of everything that they've accomplished, And when I got done, as a matter of fact, I had to work on that this past week. When I got done, um, the final product was 91 pages long. Yeah.
Okay, that's
And
just
just
a list of like all of the accomplishments you've had in your lifetime, and okay,
yeah,
that's impressive.
yeah. And so, but and again, there was stuff that I had to go back and I had to start looking at. I even forgot that I had done some of the things that you know I had put them into a document or a resume, or because what I did is I took all my different resumes and cross referenced them from over the years, because there's things that you do that you forget about. And yeah, when I used AI to take all those things and cross reference them, and but the end product when I got done, yeah, it was 91 pages of stuff.
That all right. I I honestly, as where I'm at in my life and everything right now, I don't think I can't foresee myself getting to that level, but the future is what you make of it and how much effort you put into it to actually get to that point.
Yeah. And again, it's about what your intent is. Do you think at any point in my life I ever intended that by the time I was in my mid 50s that I would have 91 pages of things that I've done? No,
Probably not.
that's no, that's never been my intent. My intent has always been to serve my purpose, do everything that I can, and we are given gifts. God gives us gifts to be able to use, and our job is to use those gifts to the maximum of our ability, um, because otherwise it's wasted. How many people have you come across that they have extreme talent in doing something and then they don't ever use it, or they waste it and they squander it on other things that or they pour all their talents and gifts into addictions or doing the wrong thing. I mean, I can't tell you how many. You look at some of the most diabolical criminals that are out there. Some of them are certified geniuses,
Hmm.
and if they had just something had happened in their life to change or redirect them, um, to use that thinking process to do good stuff, man, how much could they accomplish? You know, I mean, you think about all these crime organizations that they have out there, the people that run those and the thought processes and the nuances that go with those decision making processes. If they would just flip that narrative and go the other way with it as far as their intent, man, what could they accomplish good in the world?
Yep.
You know, but
Yeah.
they don't.
So, speaking of your accomplishments, um, I remember there was a certificate that was right by your side of the bed, and it had two tomahawks in it.
It's actually a plaque. Yeah.
Yeah, and was it? And on the name it said Davis Mad Dog McAllister. What's with the
Yeah.
nickname?
So I I earned that nickname. It wasn't given to me, or I didn't take it on. Somebody gave it to me, and then it just kind of stuck. Um, I got that name in 1993. Um, I had been in Monterey, California. Was going through language school for my job in the military, and there was a place in downtown Monterey that it was kind of a sports bar type thing. A lot of us go down there, just kind of hang out. I didn't drink, but we would go down and sometimes you could get up and do karaoke, but they always had a pretty good singer in there. And a bunch of us had gone down there to hang out. There was probably about 15, 20 of us that were all together. And this particular night, I went to the bathroom and this guy comes in the bathroom. I mean, he's obviously been drinking, but he just starts talking shit to me and talks about how he hates people in the military. He said he was a SEAL, and I said, "Bullshit, you were never a SEAL." Uh, and he just kept talking trash, and so and basically, I was picking a fight with me, and I just said, "Dude, I'm not, I'm not here to pick a fight. pick a fight with you. And so I go back out there, and he's still, I mean, he's following me out, you know, and still talking trash. And so he goes and gets with his buddies, and now I've got three of them that I'm trying to contend with. And so I finally said, "Fine, all right, let's go outside." You know, and so I followed them outside, and the other two walked around. So when you walked out, there was kind of like this little half wall out there, and then some bushes and stuff, and then you could go around, and the main street was around, this little half wall. Um, but I walk out, and um, this one guy, he and I start to square up, and then what I didn't realize is that my entire crew followed me out, and so I turned around, I got 15 guys standing behind me, and And then, because the guy that was wanting to square up with me, all of a sudden he stopped, and dropped his hands, and I was like, "What are you doing?" I said, "You called this out. Let's go." And he said, "Nope." He said, "I know how this is about to go. I'm not. I, I changed my mind." And at about that time, one of my other buddies comes around the corner. He stops. He said, "Hey, there's a guy with a bottle over on the other side." And so I was like, "Okay." So I walk around, and he he takes that bottle and he breaks it, and he's waving a broken bottle at me, and that just pissed me off. Um, and so I just keep walking towards him. I said, "You want to stab me? Go ahead, stab me. Let's go. Let's see how far you get." And long story short, basically, he ended up, flat on his back. I took the broken bottle away from him, um, beat the hell out of him a little bit, and then, then his buddy comes over and they start getting into it. And I'll get up and I just walk back around. And about this time, the cops show up, and they're going at it. And so, the two guys that showed up, the friends that were trying to pick a fight with me, they're now fighting each other. I don't know where the third guy went; he disappeared. Um, but the cops show up, arrest those two guys, and we just went back inside. So, but yeah, that's where that name came from.
Mad
So,
dog.
yeah, because I was just
That's
I was
awesome.
just so I was just so pissed off that was even happening. I was just trying to have a good time. I was trying to visit with my buddies, and yeah, and had somebody that just decide they were going to come in and disrupt it. You know, um, that kind of went along with the lines with it's, growing up too. I was always smaller than everybody else. Um, I was one of the smallest guys in my class growing up, and so when you're the small guy in the class, you tend to end up having people pick on you and try to fight you, and so growing up I had to fight quite a bit, because back then they didn't threaten to throw you in jail, or back then you would just get taken to the principal's office. They'd take a board and whack you on the ass and send you back to class. um, and so that happened quite a bit. And then of course when you get in the military too, especially the job that I had, we had to do a lot of hand-to-hand combat stuff, and do a lot of training where that was concerned. So, it just kind of went along with
You met
just kind of
someone
went along with
famous
that
while
environment.
what was it, while you're learning hand-to-hand combat training, didn't you?
Uh, well, I've met quite a few famous people. And when I was in Monterey, I met Reggie Jackson, he's a famous baseball player from back in the '70s. Played for the Oakland A's. Um, he actually owned a sports bar downtown Monterey. We would go down there and hang out. He would come and sit at the table with us and hang
Heck
out
yeah.
with us because, yeah. I met Charles Barkley one time. Um, we were standing in line at the movie theater, and I heard this like deep, dark voice, but it was like way up here, and I'm like, I didn't know if I was hearing voices or if I was having some sort of, divine experience. But I turned around and I looked, and it's Charles Barkley standing there. And he looked down at me and he goes, "What's up, man?" And so we got to talking to him, and it was ended up being a really cool conversation, and we all went in and watched a movie. But um, when I was at Fort Lewis, the unit that I was assigned to, so my main unit, I was a military intelligence unit. Our unit got deactivated, So I ended up getting detached out to other assignments while I was there. And one of the assignments that I got to go do is I got to go over and help out some at First SF Group. They had a military intelligence detachment over there, and the guy that was running things over there was my NCOIC when I was in Korea, and so he managed to pull some strings, allowed me to be able to go spend some time over there. And at the time, uh, the Ranger bat that was up there, I always forget if it was first or third. I think it's first Ranger bat was up there. Um, but they invited Royce Gracie up to come up, and this guy named Mark Lewis that they invited to come up uh, and teach some classes and talk about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and because at that time there was, MMA was not the MMA everybody knows now. It was strict. um, the UFC at that time was everybody had their own kind of niches that they grew up with. It was a wrestler, or you did traditional karate, or a Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or and that was in the time that like Kim Shamrock and Royce Gracie's, all the Gracies and all them were competing in the UFC. Anyway, he came up and we got to do some stuff with him. But fast forward, um, ended up meeting up with a guy that he's become a pretty good friend. He's actually a retired Delta Force guy, and at the time he and I were actually in that same deal at the same time. Did not know each other, and that's when he was in Ranger Bat uh, before he went full SF, and so it was kind of cool. And he invited me to a deal for fundraising for special operators, and Royce Gracie showed up, and so I actually have a picture with me, my buddy, and Royce Gracie. Years later, we were talking about it, and he remembered the whole. He didn't remember us, obviously, but he remembered that whole event. So it was pretty cool.
So, speaking a little bit more on your military experience, what does a bad day look like for someone in your profession during your time of service?
Yeah. So, because I worked in Intel, there, you work around a lot of classified type stuff. Most of the people operate just as a basic secret level of intelligence clearance. I was ended up in a top secret. The group that I was with and the teams that I was working with, I ended up having to have a top secret clearance with. And so, and because I was also cross training in counterintelligence, my job at the time, I was strictly an interrogator, and then we started cross training to where I could do both counterintelligence and interrogation because they were actually separated. And it was easier for me to learn the counterintel stuff as an interrogator than it was the other way around. Um, but a bad day for us is if you're and there's two aspects of my job. You have a tactical side and you have a garrison side. So most of your garrison side, they're wearing suits every day, drinking coffee, and they're going into debriefing rooms and debriefing detainees and those types of things. And then you have the tactical side where we're up there on the front line. We're actually involved a lot closer to the stuff that's going on. And and sometimes if I got to debrief somebody, depending on how high value they were, sometimes I might have maybe 10 minutes to debrief them before they get you know packed up and moved further back to a more garrison, more permanent place for them to be able to be questioned. Um, but a bad day for us is if we got compromised, especially if we're running any type of reconnaissance type operation, or if we're doing anything along those lines. If we got compromised, it was bad. Um, and unfortunately, at the time too, because of the job that we were doing, we were told if you get caught, you're on your own. Um, so don't get caught. Because we would even have to grub out. We'd have to scrub our uniforms. We couldn't wear rank. We couldn't wear insignia. We couldn't do any of those things. Um, and so if you get compromised, that would be a very, very bad day.
Yeah. So, looking back on your military service and all 8 years of that, there was a there is there a hysterical moment during that time that you would like to share?
Um, I mean, we had quite a few because the pranks were abundant. I mean, we would have there was like little things here and there. Like we had a couple guys that they were like, they were like best buds that lived right across the hall from each other in the barracks, and then those barracks, the doors opened into the room instead of out, and which is probably why they started designing the barracks to where the doors opened out because of this right here. We would tie a rope between their two door handles, and then we would knock on both their doors, or we come down the hall telling them, code whatever, and that means that everybody's got to get their butt downstairs. And we start yelling code, and then you would sit there and watch them fighting each other. The doors just bam, 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 back and forth, trying to open their doors. And they're sitting there pulling against each other. Um, there's another guy that was in our unit. He grew up Korean, but he spoke English, and he was in our unit. And he was kind of obnoxious, and he got drunk, passed out one night. Um, so we took him, we put him in his room, we put him in his bed, and then we got several balls of twine, and we basically spider webbed his room. I mean, we ran it through everything in his room, down into his drawers, his underwear. We looped it through his underwear, through CDs, everything, and then um, so that if you opened up the door, it had it rigged where if you opened up the door, everything that it was looped through would just get suspended in the middle of the room. And yeah, so there was stuff like that. Um, let's see, I think it was, there was always and one particular unit that I was in, you would go through. Basically, it was a undetermined amount of time of initiation, orientation. Um, you would randomly, because you were the low guy on the totem pole, you might get randomly jumped and duct taped to a chair and stuffed in a closet. Um, or then there was what we called Tubo Tuesdays. It was tap out or blackout Tuesdays. And so at any given point in time, somebody may jump, you try to put you in a chokehold, and you either tap out or black out. You know, and
I think we need to bring this back.
no, no,
So
no, no,
dramatic.
no. I'm not giving ideas. This was just what the stupidity that we did. Um, but yeah, it was just kind of that kind of you know ridiculousness.
Mm.
I could just imagine somebody in my profession in the military going through that. Like, we don't have any of that training, like the hand-to-hand combat training uh, being in the Navy and
ATs.
everything, but
Yeah,
just like the tap out or blackout kind of thing. I could just imagine how bad it could go or how good it would go. It
yeah.
literally 50-50.
Imagine just like walking into personnel and you just see that happen between two yeomen.
Yeah. It's one of the worst things that happened to me. Um, was I didn't date a whole lot when I was in the military, um, but I was stationed up at Fort Lewis and decided, what, I'm going to try to date. I met this girl and I was like, hey, let's go to the movies, and where we were at, you had to park and you had to walk a couple blocks to the movie theater, and we start walking to the theater, and we go and we watch the movie, and then we're walking back, and all of a sudden this vehicle pulls up and all these guys jump out with hoods on their heads, and they're trying to grab me, and not her, me. And of course I'm like, I'm fighting, I'm throwing punches and I'm kicks and biting everything else, and 1-on-6, it's especially if it's 1-on-6 with other guys that are trained the same way you are. Eventually I got overwhelmed, and ended up with a hood over my head. And they drug me into the van and took off, and left her standing there, on the sidewalk. And yeah,
Oh, she was most definitely terrified.
yeah, she would never answer my calls again after that. So
Shit.
Oh
yeah,
Oh Lord.
no.
yeah. The result of that was I ended up getting thrown into the Pacific Ocean out on the coast.
Oh Lord.
That's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah.
So, Dad, I also got to ask, what was college life like at Mississippi State, and how did that transition go from military to college life?
Um, I I had a very obviously I had a very different perspective when I was going to school than what everybody else was there for. I mean, you think about your average college student, it's people that they're coming straight out of high school. Their experiences are um, very juvenile in comparison. Um, after having spent that time in the military and then going and having to sit in classes with these people that they're obviously there for a different reason than you are. I'm there for a purpose. I'm I was very mission oriented, and I'm like, I need to get my stuff. That's why I finished my first bachelor's degree in 2.5 years. I'm like, I got something to do, get it done, get it over with. Um, and I applied it to that in everything that I did. Um, but I was going crazy. Yeah, in all honesty, you get thrown into a classroom with a bunch of 18, 19-year-old snot-nosed kids that all they've known is, mommy and daddy, and they're
How old were you whenever you went to Mississippi State?
I was 26, 20. I had turned 25, about to turn 26. Um, and yeah, it was pretty difficult. And that's part of the reason. And I was working out. I was still doing powerlifting and stuff like that. But um, that's part of the reason why I went ahead and accepted the challenge of trying to do a walk on at the for football. Um, and because that's what it was allowing me the outlet, you know, to try to cope and deal with that. That's not recommended for everybody. Um, but I definitely, for anybody, especially if you're in the military and you're thinking about going to school, you're going to have to kind of adjust your perspective. Um, you know, the military is really good about getting you trained up for your job and integrating you into the culture. It doesn't do a very good job of getting you integrated back out of the culture. Um, and so, because you go back out into the civilian world, and there are certain things that you miss about being in the military. I mean, there's always the political BS that you hate to deal with, and you got people that are in leadership positions that really should never be in leadership positions. But I hate to tell you, you're going to run into the same thing out in the civilian world too.
Yeah.
You know, um, and you got people that are just stupid. You've got to take on the perspective of why you're there. Um, you're not necessarily there to deal with everybody else. You're there for a mission and a purpose, and just focus on that. I mean, if you want to get involved in things, get involved in things, but you have to do it from the perspective of it's not going to be the same. It's not going to run the same way as it did in the military. You know, and you have to develop some more patience with that. Um, yeah, and that was some things that I had some interactions with people that could have gone a lot better than what they did, um, just because of that difference. And yeah, so
So I
Mm.
know we've been discussing like your military history, like your time at Mississippi. Uh,
mhm,
Throughout your like whether it's been uh, while you're training or otherwise, or being in school, what would you say is like a favorite story of yours coming out of U.S. history. It is the 4th of July after all, so I don't see the harm in
Yeah.
asking that.
Yeah, no. I'll that's hard for me because I am I'm definitely not a historian or history scholar by any measure, but I love studying history and I love military history. Um, it's hard for me to nail down. I would have to say I love reading stories out of Vietnam. I love the World War II stories. Because of the difference in mindset of the people in the military at that time. And then I did growing up. I did a lot of Civil War history because I do have ancestors that fought in the Civil War. Um, I'll be honest with you. Probably one of my favorite things is the Band of Brothers. The story of Easy Company. One of my things I want to do is they actually have a tour over in Europe that starts in Normandy, and it's called the Band of Brothers tour, and they take you through their entire campaign tour and through Europe, and it ends at the Eagle's Nest in Germany. And yeah, that's something I would really love to do one day.
That sounds
That
cool.
actually would be a really cool trip to take.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly, I don't remember what his rank was when he finally left the military, but
Mhm.
Winters has
Yeah.
been put up for the Medal of
Major.
Honor. Major. Okay.
Yeah.
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 Major Winters has been recently put up for the Medal of Honor. Medal of Honor.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
that based on the story of that man's life and how his time
Mhm.
in the military was during the Second World War, that
Yeah.
is definitely someone who is worth it or worth having that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That dude was smart. I mean, it just had a mind for you know military strategy. I mean, you want to talk about somebody that was serving their purpose and doing what they were good at. That was him.
Mhm.
It's
So
funny
we're
because we
gonna wrap
usually
up with our last two questions.
okay.
Um, so the last two questions are: what is your funniest story from college? And that could be from any of the colleges that you went to.
Mm. I don't know if this is a funny story or not. It's funny for me now. It wasn't funny at the time. So one night I had uh, been over one of the halls studying late, and to get back over to where my dorm was, I had to go. I had kind of walked through fraternity row, um, and to get across campus, and I'm having to go up this hill, and it was a wrong time, wrong place situation. And there was some sort, I don't even know what fraternity it was. They were having some sort of part of their rush week thing where um, all these guys were like sprinting up the hill, and then these guys were coming out of the bushes, out of the woodworks with paddles and like whacking these guys as they're walking up the hill. And this guy comes up to whack me with a paddle, and I took the paddle away from him and basically beat the hell out of him with it, and then walked up the hill, and I just tossed his paddle out in the middle of the street and just kept walking.
Yeah, I can
No.
see how that's funny
uh,
now as opposed to in the moment, especially like
yeah,
you're prior military at that point, and they probably didn't know that.
no, they didn't know who I was. They just saw I was because I saw all these guys just running up the hill, and I'm just walking. I've got a backpack on my back, and you know, whoever this guy was, he just made a very bad decision on who he decided he was going to try to whack with a paddle, and
Yep.
you know, it didn't go well for him. So
Mhm.
that's probably the one that stands out the most.
Shit. So
I probably
the
wouldn't have
last
handled it that
question.
way. I probably would have gotten my ass beat.
So the final question that we have to wrap this up is: what you would consider the best advice that you've ever given to a player or student?
Um, this is the thing that I try to encourage everybody to do, um, and and I really hope that people take this seriously. That when it comes to your life, you know, while I firmly believe that God guides us in our life and pushes us in directions, um, we still have free will and a say in how things go. And if you're going to live by a standard, live by the highest standard. You know, don't settle for good enough. Don't settle for don't let good be the robber of the best. You know, um, set a standard for yourself and for others around you that that you expect yourself to meet, and the people that you're going to surround yourself with live by that same standard. You know, um, if all you do is just settle for good enough and everything in your life, that's all you'll ever have. You're just barely gonna you're just gonna barely eke by in life. Um, Set a standard for how you want to live. How you do do it in every aspect of your life. How you work. I mean, I've worked in places that I absolutely hated the job. I hated the people that I had to work with. But when I still showed up to work, I still did my job to the standard. And I did it to the highest standard, and always set my standards higher than everybody else's. If everybody else is right here, I'm going to shoot for here in everything that I do. Um, and that's what I try to get other people to do is, set your goals, set your standards, work towards your goals and your standards. There's a lot of times you're going to set goals that are so lofty you may not ever achieve them, but the point is to work towards it, and and you're going to have to make adjustments here and there. Um, you're going to have setbacks. Some of the greatest lessons in life is failure. You know, um, I have started businesses and they failed. I have started businesses and they have succeeded. You know, um, one of the things that you know, talk about history. Walt Disney. Walt Disney went into bankruptcy 6 times before he established Walt Disney World, and he was looking for investors. And at the time, the CEO of General Motors (GM) was Lee Iacocca, and Walt Disney went to Lee Iacocca trying to get funding to be able to establish Walt Disney World. And Lee Iacocca said, "You know what? You've gone into bankruptcy 6 times. I'm not, I'm not going to share in this dream." And he was later quoted as saying, he said his biggest regret in life was not investing in his friend, um, because you know, look at what it turned into.
Yeah.
That dude lost out on a lot of money.
Oh,
but you're going to fail. Abraham Lincoln failed, so many times, and then all of a sudden he became president. Um, you know, there's virtually nothing that is out of reach. Um, and you've got to live by that mindset of I'm always going to do what's best. I'm going to do what's right. Um, and don't make up excuses. You know, um, People have excuses for failure. You have to have reasons for success. You know,
that that's actually really good advice. Uh,
It is.
before we officially end this off, is there any place that people can find you online?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I actually have a website. It's Dr. Davis Mcalister. If anybody ever wants me to come speak, I do speak. I'm kind of an anomaly in the fact that I do speaking and I do consulting. Um, and so I'll do motivational type stuff, but I also talk on healthcare, sports, and athlete stuff, sports medicine, and I also do stuff on the business side. I do a lot of human resources, and business development, the business strategy, and most recently I've started going into AI implementation strategy for companies. Um, my website is drdavismcallister.com. Just make sure you spell McAllister right because that's what most people screw up. It's it's Mcalister, just one C, one A, one L. Don't add extra letters. It's already long enough. You know, um, But yes, drdavismcalister.com, and anybody can reach me on there. And if anybody's truly interested in having me come and do a talk or anything along those lines, you can also email me info@drdavismcalister.com.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
thank you very much for coming and speaking and telling your story for us today. It's been a
Yeah, absolutely.
pleasure
Thank you for
chatting
inviting
with
me.
you.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, we have officially ran out of time, so have a happy 4th. Don't drink and drive. Stay away from illegal fireworks. And I am Mac,
I'm Ian.
and I hope to see you in the next episode.
All right. Have a good one,
Finish,
everybody. Oh,
finish the weekend with all 10 fingers.
Yeah.
definitely good advice.